Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum bringing timely economic discussion to the region for 35 years. Presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. Presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Martins Point Health. Care. Cooperating sponsors, First Light, WEX, and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Community Corner sponsor, Goral Palmer. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, KeyBank, and Verrill. Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs sponsors, Springborn Staffing Center and AAA Northern New England. Media partners, News Radio WGAN, The Forecaster, WMTW News 8, Maine Biz, with production support provided by Headlight. Special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, the University of Southern Maine, and Southern Maine Community College. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President, Jim Cohen.
Good morning and welcome to Eggs and Issues, the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce monthly and for the foreseeable future virtual business breakfast. My name is Jim Cohen, once again coming to you live from my living room studio in the North Deering neighborhood of Portland, Maine. I'm a partner with the Verrill law firm, and I'm honored to serve as the volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber Board of Directors. I want to thank all of you for joining us safely this month for Eggs and Issues. Speaking of safe, I'm sure all of you have watched with a mix of alarm and concern as COVID-19 cases tick up in the state of Maine. This situation makes it all the more important that we keep gathering small, socially distance, and wear a mask. The Portland Chamber takes these steps seriously and has partnered with several organizations through a COVID-19 Keep Maine Healthy grant, spearheaded in part by South Portland Economic Development Director Bill Mann, to issue a series of public service announcements encouraging all of us to wear a mask. We're going to show you one of those spots right now.
No one wakes up in the morning and says, I can't wait to wear my mask again today. So on behalf of businesses across our community, thank you for wearing a mask.
Thank you.
Thank you. We just want to thank everyone who's done their part.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gracias.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you.
Your efforts are helping us stay the course for a better future ahead. Learn more at portlandregion.com.
So thank you so much to the Chamber, Bill Mann, and everyone who helped contribute to those public service announcements. And please remember, wear a mask. Now, today's program focuses on Portland ballot referendum question A, which passed at the polls earlier this month and includes an emergency wage provision to be enacted during declared states of emergency. The Chamber worked hard to inform its members and the public about this referendum question, and we were disappointed that the initiative passed at the ballot box. Now that this question has passed, many serious questions have arisen about what it means, who it applies to, and when it takes effect. We've also heard from many of our members who fear that the new emergency wage might cause them to close their doors, lay off workers, or move out of the city. Today's program is focused on these and other questions that have been pouring in from members, and we have two terrific panels to address the legal and business aspects of the emergency wage. But before we turn our attention to the program, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors of Eggs and Issues who make this event possible, whether in person or virtual. First and foremost, our presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare. I also want to thank our other generous sponsors, First Light, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, Clark Insurance, KeyBank, Verrill, Goral Palmer, AAA Northern New England, and Springborn Staffing. A special thank you to our media partners, The Forecaster, WGAN, WMTW, Maine CW, and MainBiz. A thank you to our FMI sponsor, the Portland Public Library, and to our friends at Headlight Audiovisual and Holiday Inn by the Bay. We miss you and hope to see you back in person soon. And of course, a very special thank you to our special community partners who support all of our chamber initiatives: Anthem, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, University of Southern Maine Community College, and MEMIC. Let's have a virtual round of applause for all of our generous sponsors. Now on to today's topic: Portland's new emergency wage. Can we afford it? Today's presentation is focused on Portland ballot question A, which passed at the polls, and which institutes an emergency wage provision in Portland during declared states of emergency. According to the ordinance, the emergency wage must be 1.5 times the minimum wage, which will be phased in over several years, topping out at $15 an hour. The ballot question was initiated by the Portland chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America and actively supported by People First Portland and Progressive Portland. Since passage of this question a few weeks ago, there have been more questions than answers, and we have been painfully reminded of the dangers of passing these types of complicated policy initiatives via referendum. It is safe to say that this initiative has caused a huge amount of confusion among small businesses, nonprofits, and other businesses in our community. Quite literally, the chamber has fielded hundreds of emails and phone calls from businesses and organizations seeking answers and sharing their concerns about the devastating potential impacts the emergency wage could have on their operations and, frankly, on employees in the city of Portland. We also surveyed our members to gauge the impact of the ordinance. 88% of respondents told us that the emergency wage would have a negative or extremely negative impact on their business or organization. When asked what changes they would be forced to make, 70% said they would need to reduce staff. 36% said they would need to reduce hours or operations. Others said they would need to either move out of Portland or close their business entirely. In the midst of a pandemic that has ravaged our community and our small businesses for over 8 months, we also know that an increase is more than most businesses can bear. The business community is looking to the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce for answers, and we take this responsibility seriously. We are currently weighing all of our options in an effort to support and protect our members and to provide more clarity as to what needs to be done and when. Today, we are fortunate to have with us Mary Costigan, a partner from the law firm Bernstein, Shur, who focuses her practice on municipal law issues. Mary is a former assistant corporation counsel for the city of Portland. Also with us today is Jim Erwin, a partner with the law firm Pierce Atwood, who is a former board chair of the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce and who focuses his practice on labor and employment law. Mary and Jim are with us today to help us understand how this initiative got here, what it means, and where we go from here. Now, at this time, I would like to welcome Jim and Mary to the program.
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Jim. Thank you for joining us this morning. So we've spent a lot of time looking at, considering the ordinance before us. But Mary, let me turn to you and ask an initial question. What is the referendum process that got us here? And who was consulted in putting these questions forward?
That is a good question, and I wish I knew who was consulted. So the way the process works in Portland is that it just takes a group of 10 people to submit something to the city clerk in order for the city clerk to then turn around petition papers, and those papers are what you see with the signature lines when people ask for you to sign. So it was some group of 10 people. I'm not quite sure who those 10 people were that created these ordinance amendments. And that's also important, is that the minimum wage ordinance was an existing ordinance, and what they proposed were amendments to that ordinance. So those 10 people get their petition papers, and then they put it out for signature, and they only need 1,500 signatures in order for them to then bring it back to the city to verify those signatures. And the council then is very limited in its way to in any way not put it on the ballot. The law essentially says that the council then has to then put it forward to the voters.
So the council is not part of the actual drafting of the ordinance.
That's correct. Not this one. This is a citizen initiative, correct.
And so you said 1,500 voters have to sign the petition. Roughly what percentage of that is of the total electorate in Portland?
You do the math. I think we have about 65,000 registered voters in Portland. So a very, very small number, less than 10%.
And can you tell us maybe briefly about what this ordinance actually does?
Sure. So it had essentially 3 categories of amendments to the existing ordinance. It changed. So the existing ordinance, just for those, the existing ordinance was passed by the city council, and it passed in 2016. And it created an increase in minimum wage for 2016, 17, and 18. And ever since 2018, if there have been any increases, we've been following the state minimum wage increases. So what they did was they went in and replaced, 16, 17, 18 with 2022, 23, 24, and laid out increases in minimum wage for those years. They also amended the tip wage section. And then what we're here talking about today is they added a new provision which creates a time and a half wage during declared states of emergency. And that time and a half is a multiplier of the wage created above, which is the 2022, 23, 24 wages.
Great, thank you. And Jim Erwin, let me turn to you now. There's been some uncertainty about when this emergency wage provision begins. And last week, the Portland City Council issued its interpretation that the wage would not start until January 1 of 2022. But there are others who take the position that it starts as early as December 5th of 2020, which is just a couple of weeks away. Can you help us understand why there's so much uncertainty about this?
Well, sure, and good morning, everyone. I would say that the uncertainty about the effective date is a consequence of imprecise drafting and a lack of any sort of what you would typically have when you have legislation is some kind of legislative history, where a deliberative body, whether it's the legislature or the city council, have discussions about it. There's a record of those discussions. You understand the thought process, and if you can't tell what a statute is supposed to mean just plainly by reading the language of the statute itself, you can look at the legislative intent and try to find out what the legislative body was driving at when they adopted the law. In this case, we don't have any of that, and we have an amendment which, when plugged into the existing ordinance, is frankly susceptible of 3 different readings as to the effective date. It could be the date that the city has decided it is going to interpret it to mean, which is January 1 of 2022. It could be the day the amendment legally takes effect, which is December 5th, 30 days after the election results. Or it could actually be January 1st of 2021. And all of those are plausible readings of the statute or the amendment. I would say that the city's decision to interpret it as being January 1 of 2022 is helpful to employers, but it is not dispositive of the question. And that's what it's because it's not legally binding. And so that's why we have this uncertainty.
Great. So now we have the city council that has come out and said, we think it starts on January 1, 2020. Why doesn't that resolve the question?
Well, it doesn't resolve the question because there's a private right of action that is provided for in the ordinance, which allows an employee to bypass the city altogether with regard to enforcing the minimum wage under the ordinance and simply go to court. There's also a wage payment statute in Maine, which could, we don't know the answer to this, it needs to be researched, but the wage payment statute in Maine could apply, and you could bypass the city mechanism altogether and simply use the Maine wage payment statute, which has treble damages associated with it. So until a court rules, and ultimately until the Maine Supreme Court rules, we won't have a definitive understanding of what the effective date is.
So we've got about 2 weeks until December 5th rolls around. And what I think I just heard you say is until the Maine Supreme Court issues some sort of finding, what does that mean for employers? Can they rely on the city council in hopes that the law court says something different? What should employers do?
Well, I think employers are frankly in a bind here. And I wish there were an easy answer to that question. They can pay the wage starting on December 5th. And if they're wrong, then they are going to have a very difficult time recouping overpaid wages if the answer comes down to be the later date. On the other hand, they could assume that the city's interpretation is correct. And if they do that and don't pay the enhanced wage, they run the risk of being sued for unpaid wages for the difference, which, as I said, and if it's a state law wages lawsuit, treble damages and attorney's fees are available to the plaintiff if the plaintiff prevails in that action. The other problem is that, so how do you actually get to the Supreme Court? And that doesn't happen overnight. There has to be a lawsuit. So it could either be an employee suing an employer saying you should be paying me this enhanced wage as of December 5th. And then that gets litigated at the Superior Court level, and then it would have to get appealed to the law court. That would take quite a few months, many months. Or it could get resolved by, if a group of employers were to decide they want to try to get a more timely answer, they could conceivably file what's called a declaratory judgment action, asking the court to declare, because they're in doubt as to whether they need to pay the wage now, asking a court to decide the question, and that could be done on an expedited basis and go to the law court on an expedited basis. We're still talking, 60 to 90 days at the very least. So in that period of time, they're between a rock and a hard place.
So just to put a finer point on what you said earlier, you said treble damages. That means if an employer should be paying $18 an hour, treble damages is 3 times 18, and that's what an employer would be liable for.
Well, it would be 3 times, if they're paying minimum wage of $12, it would be that $6 times 3 times every hour the employee worked. And there's a very good chance it won't be just that one employee. It could be an entire workforce.
So Mary, let me turn back to you. So there's obviously some challenges and uncertainty around this ordinance. Why can't the city council, which just said it interpreted the ordinance to start at a certain time, why can't they just go in and change the ordinance and clarify it like they could with any other ordinance that the city has?
That is because this ordinance was passed by a vote of the people. And in order to change an ordinance that was passed by the vote of the people, you need to go back to the people if that change occurs within 5 years of passage. So the council could change this, but only if they put amendments back out to a vote. Anyone else could change it. 10 people could go to the city with a petition, just like the proponents of this, and ask for a new referenda to change it. But it can only be changed through a vote of the people.
So during the campaign, I saw on social media, and I was part of other debates and conversations, and I heard proponents of the ordinance say, that's not true. It turns out the city really can change the ordinance. But what would you say in response to those criticisms?
I think that the ordinance for citizen initiatives in the city is very clear, that the city council cannot amend or repeal an ordinance passed through citizen initiative within 5 years of passage unless through a vote of the people. So I think what they were probably saying, the city council can change it. They forgot to add, as long as they then put it out for a vote.
So let's talk about that. What would it mean if the council decided to put it out for a vote? How long are we talking? What does that process look like?
Well, unless the city council wanted to hold a special election, we're probably talking about June. So it wouldn't resolve the immediate uncertainty, that's for sure.
Could the council schedule the election for a sooner date?
They could if they wanted to spend the money for a special election, but it still takes some time to get a ballot together, get it out for, it would not happen anytime soon.
Great. So we've had lots of questions come in from employers about, well, who does this apply to? And Jim, let me turn back to you. I've heard a bunch of different interpretations about who this applies to. For example, People First Portland retained the Maine Center for Economic Analysis, and they did a report dated August 29th of this year. And in what that report states, which is on the website of People First Portland, that the emergency wage is something that would temporarily increase wages for frontline workers who are not able to work from home. And then one of the spokespeople for People First Portland, M. Burnett, told the Press Herald in a newspaper article on November 4th that the emergency wage provision would apply to all, quote, essential, close quote, workers. So here's the question. Does this initiative only cover frontline or essential workers, or is it broader than that?
Well, I don't know what frontline or essential means from a legal standpoint. I know what the ordinance says, which is that it applies to all employees. Employees is a defined term under the minimum wage ordinance, which means anybody who works in the city, whether full-time, part-time, seasonal, or temporary. Doesn't matter whether the workforce is one employee or 1,000. It's everybody. The only exception under this amendment is that it doesn't apply to people working under a telework arrangement, which is an informal agreement between employer and employee that allows the employee to work somewhere other than their typical place of work, which, and we all know in this day, is practically, in almost all cases, it's working from home. So if you're working from home, it doesn't affect you. If you're not working from home, if you're working at your normal workplace, it covers you. And whether you're essential or non-essential, frontline, backline, or somewhere in the middle, none of that is really part of the ordinance.
What if I'm an employee who has a choice about whether to go into the office or stay at home, and I choose to stay at home? Do I lose my opportunity to earn that emergency wage?
If you're staying at home with your employer's consent or agreement, then you're under a telework arrangement, and most likely you're not going to be able to claim entitlement to the wage.
Great. So if we consider then just the math, employers have asked the question, how is that 1.5 times wage provision applied? For example, do I need to pay all of my employees 1.5 times whatever they're making, or is it only limited to the class of employees actually earning the minimum wage?
Right, so that's an important clarification. If you're already paying somebody over $18 an hour, then you do not need to pay the enhanced wage. So what the effect of the ordinance is, it creates a temporary minimum wage during an emergency. So if you, it was 12, it is 12 now under state and state law and the city ordinance. And in the pandemic wage, if you will, it would be 18. So if you're already paying that much, then this does not force that number to go up. The problem, however, is that if you're an employer with workers in the city and outside the city who are paid the same, and you have workers in the city who would get this time and a half enhancement, there's an equity problem, of course, then across your workforce. And there's also a compression problem because you have workers, if you're making $18.50 an hour, you get no increase. If you're making $12 an hour and you're now making 18, then that compresses the wages inside your organization as well. So it's not just as simple as the math, because you've also got some unintended consequences that employers will have to deal with their employees.
So a number of employers have been paying $15 an hour, let's say, as their minimum wage. But let's say an organization has some workers at $12, some workers at $15. Is the effect of this wage that the $12 an hour minimum wage workers would then jump to $18, and the $15 an hour workers whose initial starting salary is higher would then be getting $3 less than the minimum wage workers?
No, they would also have to jump to 18 because 18 becomes the least per hour that you can pay your non-exempt employees. So it creates a new floor for everybody.
Got it. Now, you and I have talked a bit offline about these challenges, and there's certainly many employers in the city, and people are talking to each other. Do you have any words of advice to employers as they wrestle with these complicated issues in terms of how they might communicate with each other?
I do. I want employers to beware of speaking with each other about potentially any potential agreement to pay less than the highest amount that you might be required to pay. In other words, there are antitrust implications to employers agreeing, well, let's pay the lower wage and see what happens. Now, you could make that decision on your own and take that legal risk. That's an individual decision for an employer to make, and you should consult with counsel about that. But you should not be talking to other employers about some sort of concerted approach to that question.
Thank you. That's good advice. Another set of questions that we've had from employers has to do with, let's say there's an employer who is physically located, their place of business is here in the city of Portland, but they have workers outside of the city of Portland as well as inside. How do they handle that difference, and does the emergency wage apply to both or just one group?
So by the way I read the ordinance, by the terms of the ordinance, you have to be working in the city in order to be subject to the enhanced minimum wage. And similarly, if you are an employer with a location outside the city who sends employees into the city for work, if you as an employer, again, this is another defined term under the statute, employer means an employer with a place of business in Portland. So if you don't have your place of business in Portland, sending workers into the city does not subject you to the minimum wage ordinance. So you have to be a Portland located business in order to be subject to this, and the work is done in Portland.
So if I'm a business with multiple locations, let's say, and I have one place of business or multiple places of business in Portland and one or more places of business outside, and I have employees who are periodically working in one or the other place, it sounds like it gets pretty complicated.
Absolutely. So if you have at least one place of business that's in Portland, and you have employees who move from place to place, when they're in Portland, they're subject to the ordinance.
it seems that when a city steps forward to have its own standards of labor, it creates a lot of complications within a small geographic area like Portland.
Well, this raises an important public policy question that goes to whether it's wise to have municipalities regulating wage payment levels as opposed to the state. And that people can debate that. There are clearly difficulties for employers who have a piecemeal wage situation that they have to deal with, because, you know, in this day and age, employment isn't really defined by the boundaries of a municipality. I mean, employers go where the talent is and where the market is, and that could be multiple locations. And to have a piecemeal wage situation to have to deal with is challenging, and frankly, not, in my view, not a good business climate.
So Mary, let me turn back to you and talk a little bit about the process in the city. So we have an emergency wage provision that could spring to life as soon as 2 weeks from today. Do we have any information as to why it was why it might have been drafted that way, when the minimum wage that would apply to all workers outside of an emergency would be phased in over multiple years? In other words, the wage wouldn't go up to $13 until 2022, providing a more balanced glide path. But this emergency wage at its soonest application would spring to life in 4 weeks. Does that make any sense?
So, you know, I think what Jim alluded to earlier is that we do not, when you have a citizen initiative, we do not have the benefit of vetting an ordinance, having legislative history to see what the intent was. So we're left with reading the plain language. And that's what the city did. The city read the plain language of the draft. If you have an existing ordinance and you make some edits to certain sections and you think you may have some sort of intent, and then you plug it back into the full ordinance and you read it as a whole, that's often where you find through vetting that your amendments may not have the intent that you thought it did once you read the entire ordinance as a whole. So the problem with the drafting is that they drafted amendments to the minimum wage through a gradual, as you said, 2022. They eliminated, deleted language about the minimum wage in 16, 17, 18, and the state minimum wage, and they replaced it with new wages beginning 2022. And then a separate section, they talk about the time and a half, and then they reference back up. So while the proponents are now saying they had an intent for this to begin in the middle of the existing pandemic, without the benefit of any vetting and legislative history, we have the plain language that does suggest that when you're referencing a minimum wage of time and a half, the minimum wage is defined in the ordinance as beginning in 2022.
So if the city council were to have debated and ultimately passed an ordinance, they would have met publicly, they would have transcripts of their hearings, there would be a record. In this case, we have a group that met outside of any public process. I mean, is there any way that a court could try to get access to those private meetings? Does that even exist as a way of interpretation? Is it even relevant for a court?
Not that I'm aware of. What the court will look to is initially the plain language. And in absence of the ability to determine the meaning through the plain language, they generally look to legislative history. When it's in a citizen initiative, they'll look to what the will of the voter was when they were passing it. And so, you know, I followed very closely the campaigning. I do not recall any discussion about this coming into effect immediately in this pandemic. This was introduced in a pandemic, and I think they could have actually made it very, very clear that it would take place immediately. And that was no discussion that I recall. So you're correct that because there's no vetting and there's no history, there's nothing to look to if a court determines that the language is not clear.
Is there a way that the city could modify its referendum process to allow the city council an opportunity to modify an initiated ordinance in the same way that the Maine legislature has that ability for voter-initiated state ballot questions?
Yes, the citizen initiative process is located within Chapter 9 of the City Code. The section of that code that has to do with citizen initiatives, however, was passed through the voters as required by the state constitution, actually. So the city council could amend that chapter to change the initiative process, but that would also have to go to the voters.
So we'd need to have a referendum to change the referendum process.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you. So I think I want to thank both Mary and Jim for spending time with us this morning and for your insights, and we look forward to continuing those conversations. Now I'd like to turn to our next panel for the remainder of today's program. Two important local businesses are here to discuss the impact that this initiated ordinance will have on their organization. So first, I'd like to welcome Lori Moses, who's the executive director of the Catherine Morrill Day Nursery, which is a nonprofit corporation located in the city of Portland. And I'd also like to welcome Matt Moran, who's co-owner of Nosh Kitchen Bar and a key player in Portland's foodie economy. So Lori, welcome. I see you here on the screen, and hoping that Matt will be joining us momentarily. But while we've got you here, Lori, let me start. Great, welcome, Maddie. So let me start by just asking you each to maybe set the stage for our audience. We're obviously in the middle of a pandemic. We went through a period of shutdown in the spring. There's been very rigid and exacting standards about how businesses should operate safely. And it's had an impact on the behavior of consumers. Can you each comment on how the pandemic has affected each of your businesses? And I'll turn to Lori first.
Sure. Thank you for having me this morning. So the pandemic has been very intense for the childcare industry. The enrollment has been low just because parents are nervous about the sending their children, and there are a lot of people out of work. So it's hit us that way. As far as the day-to-day operations, we are spending a lot of time and increased labor in screening children, screening teachers, making sure that we have the PPE, making sure that we're cleaning and disinfecting, which we do normally, but we have enhanced it. So we take a lot of time cleaning everything all day long. And then the other thing for us is because we're not allowing parents in the building. So we're escorting children from outside to the classroom at the beginning or the end of the day, which takes additional staff. Additionally, because we're not mixing children in different classrooms, we can't combine classrooms at the beginning and the end of the day. So again, we need additional staff. So already our business model, which is based on enrollment, is already devastated. And we're hoping to make it through with reduced enrollment and enhanced work.
Thank you. And Maddie, let me turn to you. How has the pandemic affected your business?
Like Lori said, just the climate of business has changed. We're operating, we're legally allowed to operate at 50%, but in reality, we can't even sit 50% of our seats due to spacing and other factors. So we're already operating at a much reduced capacity, and now we're being asked to add potentially up to 30% of payroll, and it's just not feasible. The margins are already thin. There's also consumer concern about being out in public, and especially in an indoor setting as we enter winter. The outdoor dining, was great while we have it.
Great, thank you. Now let's turn to where we are today, which is in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of the challenges you each outlined for your businesses, as well as no doubt other similar businesses within the city, not-for-profits and small businesses. Now we have this new emergency wage provision and uncertainty about whether it kicks in on December 5th of this year or whether it kicks in on January 1 of 2022. But let's suppose for a moment that the answer is that the wage kicks in 2 or 3 weeks on December 5th. Maddie, I'll turn to you first. How would that affect your business and similar businesses within Portland?
So I do have another restaurant in town, Slab, Sicilian street food down on Preble Street. So a little bit larger space, a little bit larger staff, and moving forward, it just doesn't make it feasible. It's the trickle up effect is something that hasn't been really addressed here by, the people who were supporting this initiative, referendum. If I have somebody that is lowest on the totem pole making $18 an hour, and you put them next to somebody who's been working for me for 5-6 years, their family's on our healthcare plan, I can't in good conscience say, I'm sorry, you're only making the same as this person now. They just walked through the door yesterday, and that's their pay, and that's also your pay. So it's the trickle up effect that, it's not only that baseline minimum wage worker that goes up, it's everybody in the building to make it fair and equitable for everybody. So I feel like that's something that's been not addressed by the people who wrote this up and supported this. And I don't think the general public was completely made aware of that. Through no fault of the chamber or anybody else, it's hard to reach everybody, especially these times, to really get the message across, whether it was the folks who wrote the referendum, the chamber, ourselves as business owners. It's tough to reach everybody, and therein lies the problem with citizen referendums.
Well, there was certainly a thing called the presidential election going on that got a little bit of airtime and may have been more of a focus of voters. But let me just ask you a little further. So you said that this was going to cause you not only to have to pay minimum wage workers or anyone who's earning under $18 an hour, 18 or more. What does that mean for your business? Can you do that?
We could sustain for a very short amount of time. Again, we don't have the reserves after a normal Portland summer to go into a winter, and our summer numbers were similar to what our normal winter numbers are. So now with the reduced capacity and storms and just people don't go out as much in the wintertime, it seems, and I'm hopeful that people maybe will stay around town and spend more locally this year, but that's yet to be seen. So our focus right now is potentially move to a straight takeout menu, which would mean laying off up to 9 employees out of 15 at this point. So it's myself, my partners working side by side. And one of the things in speaking to some of the supporters of this referendum is, these employees are putting themselves at risk. Well, we're also putting ourselves at risk. We're working on the front lines with these folks, and, we're not being compensated. We're actually, it's costing us more money to be there. So at that point, it's no longer economically feasible for us to continue business as usual.
So you said earlier that there's a sort of seasonality to the restaurant business and maybe the retail business in Portland, where summers are busy, winters are slow, and you need that strong summer and the revenues in the summer to help weather the cold season. But that this year, with a slow summer, you don't have those reserves. Is that something that we would expect to see across our important foodie economy in Portland?
Absolutely. I mean, we are fortunate in Portland. We're not quite as seasonal as, a lot of coastal towns in Maine, but and a lot of it is our colleagues in the business support each other all year long. But without that extra money they have, will they be going out as much? Will they be ordering takeout as much? And that's just something that we don't know yet. And there's places in town that maybe their outdoor seating tripled their normal capacity, but now that we're into the winter months, there's places in town that may only have 10 seats that they can physically use in their space. And it's certainly not economically feasible for those people to operate without going to straight takeout or just shutting down. If it's just your fixed cost you're paying and that's your loss, maybe you cut your losses or, look for other options outside the city.
And if businesses close their doors, are they coming back?
That's $1 million question right now. We've lost some wonderful places already, and if this does kick in December 5th, I expect more dominoes to fall. Certainly, I've spoken to a number of local restaurant owners that said, we'll wait it out, we'll shut down, and see where we're at when this pandemic's over, or when we have an increased capacity.
So the foodie economy in Portland is going to be on hold for quite some time.
I mean, I see it that way, and certainly it's a huge tourism attraction also. So the effects are going to be a ripple effect throughout all of Portland, really.
Thanks, Maddie. And Lori, let me turn to you. You're a not-for-profit business. The services you provide are critical. Can you help us understand how this emergency wage provision, if it kicked in as soon as December 5th, how would that impact your business and the people you serve?
For us, we have, and I'm not sure if my camera's working or not, but for us, it would mean we have no place else to go other than parent tuition. There's no hidden wells of funds for us. We're based on parent tuition and the private tuition. So there really is no choice but to pass that cost on to parents, working parents. And for my program, we estimated it would cost us about $2,500 a week. And so that cost will be borne on the private paid families because we accept subsidies, and the state only has a reimbursement rate that's locked in. There's no way they will pay or can pay more, and there's no place else to go. We have nothing else to cut in a business that's 75-80% labor as it is. So there's, some programs may not be able to weather it. They might close their doors, as Maddie said, and wait it out. Others may pass that increase. And for us, I mean, we can't telework childcare. You can't do that from home. So for us, we have no choice but to pass this burden on to families. And some families won't be able to afford it, and then they won't be working. So we are the workforce behind the workforce. If childcare closes its doors, then that will have a ripple effect on other businesses who won't be able to have employees who are able to work. And it will put strain on already tapped industry in other communities, so that people will be going to the surrounding communities, but there's not enough childcare already. And so it's dire. And I know that our board, we are not going to take the risk of getting sued. We can't afford it if we were to lose, and it's not a good thing. We've worked for years to build our wages for the staff. But as Maddie said, we've worked for years to have people get paid more who have the educational requirements as well as experience and longevity. And I can't have someone who, walks in, has a high school diploma, making the same wage as or more than someone who's been in our employ for several years. So it's going to be devastating. And I like I said, with my colleagues, we've looked at, unless there's some kind of gap funding, which some emergency funding, which I don't know where that would come from, the only other avenue is parent tuition. And that
So
will be
Lori, you said earlier, you're a not-for-profit corporation. So there's no reduction, there's no investors, there's no shareholders you can turn to help weather the storm.
No, no, it's us. It's our parent tuition. That's what we have.
And you also mentioned that the state is in their reimbursements that come from the state. We've often heard people refer to themselves as on a fixed income. Would you describe at least a portion of your business essentially on a fixed income because of those state set rates?
It's some are fixed income, but some it's lower income. So, and I hadn't really thought about this till just you said this. For families who might work in Portland, and let's say their wages go up to $18 an hour, they may be kicked off the subsidy system. I hadn't thought of this till the second, but it's based on income eligibility. So if they're making, let's say they're making $12 now and they're making 18, they may not be eligible anymore. So then there's a cliff where instead of paying based on income $30, $40 a week for childcare, they'll be paying $250, $300 a week for childcare, which they can't do. So it's so tied in our industry. The tuition is tied into our wages. That's how we work.
Were you or any of your colleagues consulted when this proposal was put forward about some of these potential ramifications?
No, not at all. And we are also deemed essential. So we are on the front lines. I screen children every day, every morning, except this morning, to be on here. And then we have children in the building all day long, as well as teachers. We're doing our best. We're masked. We wash hands. We disinfect. But we're on the front lines every day. And so if there's a component that says essential workers only, that would be us.
So there are a number of not-for-profit corporations in Portland, whether they're arts organizations, environmental organizations, social service organizations. Portland as a service center has many employees in those fields. Are those not-for-profit entities likely to be in a similar type of situation to where Catherine Morrill finds itself?
It depends on their business model. I mean, ours is so labor intensive. If you can work at home, it sounds like that's an exemption. If it depends. It just depends on the business model. I really can't speak. I think there's some that would absolutely be hurt because of the wages, and then there are others maybe find some creative ways to not pay. And to work around it. But in our industry, we know that we can't do childcare from a distance. So there's no other way to go. We also are beholden to state ratios and group size, which is why our labor costs are so high. So we can't decide, well, we're going to take more kids or have less teachers in a classroom. We just can't do that. And we can't have the teachers transporting kids if they're in the classroom. So as I said, our labor costs have already gone up due to the pandemic. Our enrollment has gone down. And now this on top of it could be a deal breaker for some programs, whether they wait it out and just close till it's over, or pass the cost on to parents and risk losing additional enrollment because parents won't be able to afford it. There's nowhere else to go.
So any social service organization like yours that relies on fixed state reimbursements, whether it's through main care through other types of either drug treatment reimbursement rates, they would face a similar type of situation to you in this pandemic when their organizations are already strained.
I would think so, because again, our reimbursement rate comes from the Child Care Development Block Grant, but there are reimbursement rates in each industry, and they're not flexible. They're not saying, you know, well, Portland, because you're in Portland and have this ordinance, we're going to change the reimbursement rate for Portland. It just doesn't work that way. And I know that we called the Department of Labor and they said they didn't care what happens in Portland. It's not their concern. So as our board is concerned, you know, we'd like to follow. I've read the ordinance and I see that it says January 1st, 2022. And I'd like to say, no, it says that. But with the encouragement to sue the employer is too much of a risk. We can't take that risk. Plus it looks bad. We have fought so hard to have a decent livable wage for our staff, and we're working on it. We're not there, but we've been working on it for years. And so this could just put a complete crunch on it.
Well, thank you so much. I think we're up upon the 9 o'clock hour. So I really want to thank Lori Moses from Catherine Morrill Daycare and Maddie Moran from Nosh Kitchen Bar and Slab for joining us here this morning and sharing your concerns about what this emergency wage provision would mean for your businesses, for similar businesses, small businesses, not-for-profits in the city of Portland. So thank you so much for joining us. And also a sincere thank you to all of our presenters for joining us today. Mary Costigan from Bernstein Shur, Jim Erwin from Pierce Atwood. And so as we conclude today's program, you can view a complete list of all of the Chamber's upcoming events on the Chamber's website, portlandregion.com. And we encourage you to subscribe to the Chamber's newsletter. And please be sure to follow the Chamber across all social media platforms. So thank you. We look forward to seeing you again next month in December for Eggs and Issues. So be well, and please have a great rest of your day.